All right, moving on to our next fireside chat that asks to understand IoT untapped business potential. Through this session, Roberto Baldizon, founder of Silibrain LLC, and Mike Wehrs, the business strategist and tech leader at Unidata Limited. They look at a variety of opportunities that IoT affords and offers tips for maximizing its potential to boost output, customer satisfaction, and operational efficiency. Please welcome them to the stage.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate you all staying till almost the end of day 3 here. I'm Mike Wehrs, and as was introduced by the announcer, I run a company called Unidata Limited and another one called BedX AI. Both use IoT to some extent, but really it's for a data feed is the way that I look at both of them. But I do have a lot of background in getting technology launched to scale, and then I'll be applying a lot of that knowledge to my comments today. Roberto.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for everyone for staying for a talk. My name is Roberto Baldizon. I'm more of a electrical and energy engineer by education, formal education. Then I love technology, so I got myself more into developing solutions in which IoT will play a very important role, a key role, as it is the one that is gathering all the endpoints that we need for then enabling AI, which is what we talked about a little bit earlier. So when we think about the implications that IoT might have in our future world, it's actually, they're humongous. Not only because they are the representation of the real world applications that the internet revolution has already enabled us, but it's also enabling us to have these solutions reach out into the real world and start doing things that will benefit not only us in a virtual space, but also in the real space. So say, for example, I know that earlier we were discussing about some potential opportunities, but I was just reading a report a few days ago from McKinsey that estimates that the power that IoT can unlock is around 13 trillion opportunity. So that's almost the size of the economy of the United States. If you think about it, then that means that if we actually do this right, if we actually start harnessing the true power of IoT, we can be in the brink of improving the livelihood of many around the world. Of course, in developed nations, but also around developing nations where it might be needed even the most.
Yeah, just to help steer us a little bit on how much basics versus depth we need to be at. Is everybody here familiar with IoT definitionally and overall what it does in the space, or should we cover that first? Cover that first. Thank you. All right, so IoT you can think about as when a device is out there and it has some sort of sensory capability, how does that connect to the internet in a meaningful way? Okay, so it's not about a person logging onto the system to do something. It's about a device saying, hey, I'm supposed to send a message out when the temperature gets above this point, or when there's water on the floor, or when the pressure is at this, or when a box gets to this location. How does that actually get done? How do you build that infrastructure in so all these devices that are out there can do a smart thing? The canonical one we all run into in our personal lives is something like a personal assistant like Alexa or Google Home, where we are interacting with this device. But you also know that that device knows what the temperature is and it knows all kinds of other things that are going on. So how is that actually working? How does it go and gather that information? So if you think about these smart devices, they were, one simple thing like a thermostat, but now you've got one that's looking at hysteresis and the amount of time that it's on per day and your electricity rates that are floating, and all of those things to make decisions about how to best organize. And that's really where IoT starts to shine. It's if there is a bit of sensory capability and there's some smarts behind that, building onto it to make it more AI friendly so that AI can be applied to it as well. Now you can start to do some very, very interesting things. It's not only cost saving, but it's ease of access. It's got to do with civil disability act kinds of things too. People can interact with it. It can do with industrial kinds of things because it can go in locations where people can't go due to size or environmental considerations. So you're dealing with a type of technology that's going to ship in units that are far greater than the number of people in the world, right? So, you can think about this a little bit. I'll give you some stats on this. What, about 10 years ago, we all had our PCs and our mobile phones attached to Wi-Fi. So, 2 to 3 devices per household. You know what the connectivity is now for households? Upwards of 50, closing in on 100 in tech-savvy environments. And that's just the beginning. So when you think about that, all of those devices are doing something. Why do they need connection to the internet? And what are the other things that could make use of that information if it were connected in the right way? And that's really a whole theme that I'd like to spend some time on with this group this afternoon is what's the right use of that information? Do you have any other way you wanted to define it?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's a very good way of putting it. So the thing is, when we have thought about all that information that's available, and when we compare it to what we had in the past, there's always been public records. There's always been some information that can be attained by people if they so want to. The difference is that because now we have 50 endpoints in a tech-savvy house, then yes, we could reach a point where some of those devices might know more about your habits than even your significant other. Which, yes, it's very comfortable because then I don't have to tell my assistant what temperature I like, or what time I like to wake up, or what time usually would be the best for me to leave the house if I want to reach work without bumping into traffic. But then again, we have the other part of it, which is not only, yes, we would like transparency of data and be able to utilize that data, but then again, and I don't know if you would agree with me, but the privacy part of it is very important because we're reaching a point where we're starting to merge not only the virtual reality of things and the virtual capabilities, but how those will interact and affect our daily lives.
Yeah, it's probably going to be the gating factor to adoption of realizing that $14 billion kind of revenue number is, and just using one of your examples, you can take the other side of it. Okay, it knows that you want to leave now in order to get somewhere, but it also knows about everybody else that is going to be leaving about now to get there. So now it can start to do things like say, I'm going to take this many people and direct them on this road as opposed to that road, which means that there's an opportunity to say, so therefore I'm going to go to that McDonald's these people are passing and tell them they ought to put an ad out right now to go and get people to come in because I'm going to drive traffic there. Now, is it really giving me the best directions, or is it giving me the one where it could make more money out of the cut it's getting out of McDonald's, right? So this is what I mean by misuse of the data. So it fundamentally breaks the trust that we have that it's a device for us, but it's also being used by someone who has commercial interest to monetize my habits and literally affect the amount of time that I spend doing things per day because it's got an ulterior motive of how can it make profit off of it. So how do we ethically move an industry forward and launch all of these devices out there when in doing so, you're basically making every one of your habits, every one of your preferences, something that someone else can monetize? And that's a scary thought.
Yeah, I agree. So we have worked in the space in different spaces, one of them healthcare and then also energy. Both are very critical in when we think about the type of information that we will handle. And we always think about the end user in mind to protect their privacy. We actually developed an EHR, which was selected as one of the top 15 solutions in the world in Medica in Germany in 2019. And then recently we collaborated with universities and launched an open source project, which is called ResiHub, that allows for people to control their battery systems powered by solar energy, taking into account weather conditions and then other IoT devices. The cool thing about that is that it really enables people to have superpowers and give them the ability to do other stuff. The other part of it, though, is that if we don't take into account the potential misuse of that, and not only because of profit, but also from a criminal standpoint, or even just from a standpoint of someone is famous and then someone else wants to make profit of that, like taking pictures of them, stuff like that, then yeah, that could also lead to a whole other area of issues. So I think it's very important to have, unfortunately, I don't know how many of the law conference people are here, but it would be very important to have regulators be involved in it from the start, especially for industries that are so tied to human well-being. I know that we have been discussing about the different applications of it, and yeah, there are different dangers. Say, for example, if there's not really good cybersecurity placed in a smart grid that uses IoT, which is one of the areas that really need improvement, then we could be facing a potential threats in which we have houses that might be cold winter in the Northeast where temperatures drop a lot, and then if someone just cuts out the heating and it happens to be electrical heating, or even if it's natural gas produced heating, but it's controlled with IoT sensors and someone cuts it out, then you can actually be facing a potential deadly situation. So yes, it could also be, it's something that needs to be taken into account every single point when you start developing these solutions.
I completely agree with you. Just to kind of put a personal fine point on it is, today just think about insulin pumps. Think about any other health-related pumping or the electronic device that can be put into a pacemaker is a really good example. Well, that's something that a doctor would generally study that after the fact, right? Say, okay, how did you do this month? And look at the feed. Maybe they do it that night, but they don't do it in real time. But with IoT, it makes it possible for someone to be monitoring your heart in real time and telling it to do different things. I'd want to be very careful about who has access to that. And you can just extend that kind of thing and say, wow, so you're really making everything about a person potentially accessible. And how do you then go back to the person and say, okay, we're going to put you in charge of it? Now, could you imagine like the rules engine that you'd have to fill out a form for? Okay, this app under these circumstances can see this data, but they can only keep it for this much time in aggregate. Nobody is ever going to do that, right? So if we have to rely on companies to figure that kind of thing out, we're all going to end up with different forms, like we do today for terms of use, right? Nobody ever reads them because what's their choice? Their choice is don't load the app. And so if it's really all or nothing all the time, everybody has gotten to the point where we expect that there's a policy, and we hope that that policy is written in such a fashion that it is ethically centered. Right, that someone is morally thinking about what it is that they've said that they can do with this, not just legally trying to get as many rights as they possibly can to misuse that information if they need to in the future. So how do you wrestle that kind of problem when you got a market dynamic this large? Because everybody wants to run at it. And this is really where the how you work with the regulatory community to sit down and not leave people who, taking a riff from the previous speakers who were up here, if you're taking lawmakers who have never used a mobile device to text, and you're asking them to write laws about how IoT stuff is going to work, it's probably going to be draconian. It's going to miss the mark. So you're really relying on what? Interns and aides that are working for them to write the laws, which again is the wrong group of people. So it's really left up to industry to come together and say, look, this is one of those times that if we do this wrong, we are going to be so regulated into the Stone Age. This is going to never take off, or it's going to take off in a manner that's not really useful. So how can we propose what we think of the things that need to be regulated and put the controls on ourselves, and then bring that and cooperate with the regulatory environment? But that, in my opinion, is really the only way that we're not going to get significant delays in getting to that $14 billion market. Yeah,
I totally agree. There's to look at it on the optimistic side of things, or the positive side. I actually know and participate with some organizations that already talk together with, there's this small component in electrical things that are called inverters that can change DC electricity to AC, which means that electricity generated from solar panels or wind turbines can be used by your normal household. So those people talk with them, and then they also talk with software developers, with regulators, and then with universities. And then with them together, they make sure to develop a set of rules which people follow, and then it's almost used as a publicity mark for those companies to say, oh yeah, we're collaborating with SunSpec. That's the name of them. With SunSpec, in the sense that we're following these rules. And then you can even take a course in San Diego, in UC San Diego, in which you will be able to learn what they are doing. So I do think, and I'm optimistic when we think about the power of the market and the invisible hand that Adam Smith used to say. It's just that we live in a time when, as consumers, we have so much power in our hands that we also need to be careful in the things that we're signing up to.
Yeah, and I don't want to come across and leave it on such a negative, everybody should be scared to death perspective, although we should be a lot more cautious than we have been in the past as a group. But it has been done, right? Their industry has collaborated with regulatory environment and gotten the right things to happen. I'll give you, one that I was involved with personally was around speech recognition on phones, right? So the whole thing was going on when phones became something that everybody carried with them. They were all talking on their phones in cars, and they were getting into accidents, and people were texting while they were driving. One of these things is like, how can possibly you do this? But then you realize you do it too. So it was there was regulation on the table to go and basically make it illegal to use your phone while in a car. Now, that would have caused a slowdown on the industry of enormous proportions. I will take full credit for this, but I was the guy who brought this into the CTIA board and said, look, when we don't work together, the CEOs of all the big carriers, Microsoft at the time, and if we don't do this together, we're going to end up in a situation where that's going to happen. So what could we do that we all could live with? And what we came up with was a very small set of things, but they were really important things. Right? Every phone had to have command and control, not just speech recognition in it. So it had to respond to a word without being touched. So that became a mandate industry. Software guys made it, installed it, and then the competition could happen. But you weren't fighting over how do you activate the phone via voice only anymore. So how do you make it so it enables, but it doesn't constrain? And if you do it right and you do it in collaboration, I mean, I was pointed out as an unbelievable success. And I don't know of too many cars that get driven any distance that don't have somebody talking on the phone and texting something with some data.
I like what you're suggesting, and I think it's great to talk about that with this audience, since I know a lot of people here are developing their own solutions or looking to do so in the near future. So the opportunities right now available for all of us really are immense, and there's a lot of things. We're very lucky to be alive in this time. There's a lot of things that we can be doing to improve our world. Then again, those things could also be misused by some players that we might not even think about it as something that's misused. And that's one of the things where we need to be careful when we develop solutions and when we propose projects and solutions to think about the risks that are that might come out with it from those solutions. Because there's when doctors do their oath, the first thing they have is first do no harm. And I think we all should do the same. Whenever we're developing solutions, first we should think about not doing any harm to anyone else using our solution, and to take them into account so that when we're doing something, we at least have thought about the potential risk. There's this famous case study about Ford, the Ford Pinto, I think it was, in the 70s, where they knew that some of their doors would get stuck if there was a fire. So they got some mathematicians and they calculated, okay, what's the average value that we'll place on a human life? They came out with some value and then said, okay, X $1 million. That's actually less than having us recalling all those cars. What ended up happening is that one car got into an accident. There was a fire. The doors got locked, and of course the people died. And just the sue from that single case was way more than whatever they had calculated for calling back all the cars. So the lesson from that is that yes, we should be optimistic. We should think about all the possibilities, all the good things that could be done, but we should also take into account the potential harm that could be caused by our solutions, and not treat them lightly, because if they could happen, then they unfortunately will.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have learned this one already. It's the power of the one. It used to be, before social networking and all the rest of it, and downsides too, of course, but before that, a corporation really could do whatever they wanted, right? Because you as an individual could not fight against that. But when your voice can get multiplied by the millions or tens of millions, if you've got something that is legitimate, compelling that people look at, you can get the word out there, and it can do enormous damage to that corporation literally overnight. So it tends to be something that there's been enough suits like this that they're aware that they can't turn a blind eye to facts and information that would harm the public if they took no action. So there is a certain amount of corporate responsibility that is lifting up, but it is in direct conflict sometimes, to your point, with revenue. So really, how do you broker that kind of piece of saying, look, I'm going to give you this access to me of everything that I've eaten in my house for the last month, and look at it in terms of time and plot this whole thing out and run all your algorithms against it, and they want to sell it to, let's see, my health insurance provider? I don't think I want that to happen, right? Because that would be an invasion, and probably I ate too much of something. And like all of us would have eaten too much of something. So how do you balance this? How do you balance that, not only on the health and responsibility of not disclosing that kind of information, but someone's making money off of that, right? And one of the topics of this panel that we were asked to cover is, what are the business opportunities that IoT, being a growing and hopefully successful, can live up to its potential? What are the business changes that are opportunities for this group to think about? And I'll kick off with one relatively controversial, but it ought to be fun. But then we'll have some more chat about it. What if, when your information got sold or used to generate some other money, that you got a cut of it? Right? All of a sudden, that's my damn data. Someone is taking that because I wanted to use their app. They're selling my information to somebody else and making money off of it. Wait a minute, that's me. Why isn't there some way to track that all the way through to say, you know what, I'm only going to preference companies that offer some sharing back to me, that if they're going to make money off of me and my information, I want something for that. Suppose there was a trademark wrapped around that whole thing, a program around that, right? Now you could do something very, very interesting that I'm making a decision about giving this information out, but it's not a blind one. If someone is really smart and figure out how to monetize that better, I can either shut them off because I don't like the results of what that's going to do to me, or I can say, I want the cash, right? So that would be an interesting idea if someone wanted to start to put something like that together, that they could literally displace the cloud-based centralized view of the way that we've architected the world in the information system and go much more to a peer-to-peer kind of model, which might help in some of the other IoT deployments as well, because right now doing IoT in real time is very, very hard. You have to go through the internet, you got to proxy it through other systems that take it more time to get there. But if you were to go direct, now you cut out all the middlemen, you cut out all the costs about that, and you enable this whole other model that the consumer has something to say about it, and they could vocalize.
Yeah, I think it's important to think about it not from a discouragement point as developers and as entrepreneurs in this space, but as a potential opportunity for building solutions such as what you suggested. I think that companies that take into account the privacy of their users, that take into account the cybersecurity of those endpoints, that are transparent with the use of data, and keep in mind always the privacy of the users whenever they're developing solutions. I think those in the end will be the companies that will survive and then will become the leaders in the space. But I would actually love to hear the audience thoughts, if anyone wants to share, if they would be willing to share their data or sell their data if there was a platform that would actually pay for it. Because I think that's a very good idea. That has been around in a similar way, in the sense that whenever you sign up to a social media platform, some of us might not know that, but that's basically what we're doing. We're basically allowing these companies to use our social media profile to build up a virtual model of whoever we are, and then sell advertisement to those specific companies looking for that demographic. But I was wondering if there's anyone that would be willing to share, if they would be willing to sell some of their data.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Actually, I got a question for you, but I'll wait until the time. So I'm a cybersecurity guy, so I can tell you right now, nobody have privacy. I don't care what you say. So because I work in that space, I have my own firewall at home. So, out to every other part of the world except in US. Guess what? My internet stopped working. So I have to enable them back because they have to go to different planets to get me data that I need. So having said that, when you say that, do we want to sell? I will tell you today, I sit in a lot of panels. I engage around the world. It happens that as of today, they don't know how to pay us back. So they are still struggling with that. Oh, that American government, they are pro-business. So they can't do anything that will actually, make the business, look bad or destroy the business concept. So to pay us back is the big deal that they are having right now. But with Web3 or Web 3.0, I can tell you that there's a possibility that we will be able to do that because of one thing. You will be notified before Google can sell your product for 0.005 cents. You'll be notified. And if you say, no, I need to get so much back, probably they will be able to quantify and how to reward you back on that. But as of today, they can't figure it out, how to pay us back for our data. Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, another stimulating conversation. So in terms of would I be willing to sell my data, I'm going to say it depends on what kind of data it is and how meaningful that would be to me. So for example, if I'm one of those types of people who monitors my sleep, which I'm not, but if I were, right? And let's just say I'm actually getting poor sleep. My REM sleep isn't really as long as it should be and all the rest of that stuff. Then my insurance company comes around and says, la-di-da-di-da, with your policy, you're going to have to take a medication, otherwise we're going to increase your insurance policy. So the answer is, yeah, no, I wouldn't sell my data under those kinds of circumstances because the consequences of revealing could outweigh any compensation I could get, particularly as I'm a person who doesn't appreciate a lot of Western medicine in the first place. I'll take a cup of chamomile tea if I'm having that much trouble. So with that being said, it depends. Let's say I was trying to be a good consumer and I was reusing my stuff very, very frequently. And I was actually reducing the planetary waste of natural resources. Would I sell that data? Possibly, because it might help engineer new business models that replace, this voracious consumption model with something like a rental model or something along those lines. So I think it depends on if we're going to be proposing new business opportunities and new ways of doing things more intentionally and mindfully, then I think the IoT is an absolute fabulous window that just opens up opportunity. But if it's going to be used to penalize me because of factors that may or may not be in control, forget about it.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought it up the way you did. In my mind, it's very hard to predict when someone is going to do something malicious or otherwise against your best interest when it's just the raw data that you're seeing, right? Because we're basically having to understand what someone might be able to do in a negative fashion. And that leads to a pretty negative lifestyle, right? When it's like, how many different ways can I get screwed, right? And you end up with somebody's going to figure out some way to use all of this against me. So it does require some means by which you can control it. And I think that the biggest challenge that I see to this is, I don't know what that form looks like. I know that it's not, you know, a website that I can go in and I can select, well, this doctor can see this, but they can't send it to this person. Unless I'm on my deathbed, then they could, yeah. Nobody's gonna spend their month, every month, going through 8 hours and saying, is it still correct, right? It's gonna be a giant rule thing. So you need something that is an intelligible interface that lets us choose who we want to see what and under what conditions. And I think that there's a great startup opportunity if somebody wanted to go spend some time thinking about that.
And to follow up on that, to the point where, let's just say, I agree to sell the data and I'm going to be compensated XYZ, right? Well, that's actually a pretty complex thing for the company that's offering that, because how do I know where that's actually going to be deposited? Am I going to really reveal my real bank account for a $5 rebate or something like this and then get hacked or something along those lines? Right. So how do you create sort of almost like a little safe deposit box for all these, you know, trinkets of rewards? Because they can't be all that big, right? But it's more of a gesture that I'm not taking you as the human for granted, that I'm acknowledging that you agreed to participate in this, and that I acknowledge that you're deserving of some compensation for making your personal data available, right? So how would that all be tracked, and how would it be, because it's de minimis money in all likelihood, how could I protect my real assets from being hacked?
Yeah, well, it's a very interesting topic. I know once we get into it, because we don't realize it a lot of time, but it's already being done. So that's one of the big issues, is that it's already happening, and we sign up for it. Whenever we sign up for a website, they give us all these terms, and no one really reads it and just says yes. So I think that's where it's really important for us as consumers to have that in the end of our, in whenever we make it a choice of buying something or giving money to something. It's very important for us to be cautious and have that in mind.
One follow-up on this is, I guess I'd use questionable banking transactions as an example of where we're seeing what I call the first signs of some responsibility on this one, push back to the person. So I don't know, every time I go out of the state that I'm normally in, that my bank is assumed that I'm in, the first 3 days suck, right? Because it's like, I didn't tell them that I was going to go to Nevada this week, right? And I shouldn't have to, but at least they're coming to me and saying, there's a charge that came in from Nevada. Do you want to let this through? So I'm getting questioned about my personal information and my personal money at that point to make a decision. So I know that doesn't scale, but for things like, do I want all my health records to be given out? Do I want my financial data to be given out? Do I want someone to be able to charge me anything more than $5 without knowing about it? There ought to be some set of base profiling that if we could do that, it wouldn't be so onerous to us if we got paying 2 or 3 times a day to protect ourselves and say, no, I don't know who that company is. I don't know what they're going to do with it. No, right? That would be fine. But it doesn't scale, right? So we're going to need something better than that. But that's a means that we're trying. At least some of the industries are trying today.
Hi there. Wanted to make an invitation to make use of a system that my father developed. He received a visionary award here at Intercon 2 years ago. Okay, yeah, so in the program, you'll find on page 15, mention of one of the patents my father made, James Duncan work, and he was anticipating solving the solution using artificial intelligence. And of course, at the time the patent was filed, the artificial intelligence had not been developed yet. It might be close. So if you read through the patent, you'll see what he calls broker agents that can be trained by the user in order to divulge which data to which parties under which circumstances. So might be interesting. Yeah.
I was unaware of it.
Yeah, thanks. We'll definitely check it out. I think it's something very interesting, and I love the example that you gave from the fintech industry, the banking industry. I think it's something that has been working out. At least I know it still has improvements to do, but it's it's way better than just saying, "Here's this ad, and we know that you're going to buy it because," or I'm sure everyone has been through the same thing, but say you Google for I don't know what's the cost of a rubber duck. And then the next thing you know is you start seeing ads for rubber ducks. I know it's kind of creepy and it can get to that point. Um, Unfortunately, we also run startups and we know that sometimes it's hard to make ends meet. And then you are like you say, okay, we're just have this ad space in which we'll have whatever Google provides and Google AdWords or so I think the main thing is to be conscious, not only as consumers, but also as developers of this technology. So whenever we're building those things, to always keep in mind that first, do no harm. First, have the end user in mind, and it can hurt the bottom line. It can hurt the revenue, can reduce the revenue opportunity, but at the same time, in the long run, it might make the business model more sustainable.
There's one other extension to that I'll bring on and troubles me a little bit too is around the whole question of longevity of data. Okay, so I may have agreed with this startup that they're only going to use my data this way, and I give them permission. I agree with that. That's exactly how I want it to be used. And then they end up having a very expensive coffee with some VC banker, and they end up getting bought. At which point, corporation that I do not trust whatsoever now has access to all of that old information. So there's no concept that we have right now about how expiry of data happens during change of control. So I think we have to address and understand that once our data is out there, it really needs to be looked at carefully as to when these things happen. Because that's not covered in any IP rights that I've ever seen in any M&A transaction. I've been in dozens, right? They never deal with, well, the only rights you have to the data are like this. Like, not that I own it, and they just bought it and they move forward. And they wait for someone to scream. And so those kinds of things, I think, are still way, way behind the times.
Hey guys, long time no see, right? Question for you. Question for you. Let's see, you can hear me now. In regards to 2023, this question is for small business owners with decreased latency, increased speed, with new technology. What advice can you give entrepreneurs so that they don't fall behind and that they're able to take full advantage of what's coming in 2023?
In terms of IoT devices and technology?
Technology in general, IoT devices, mostly going in the direction of how do we prepare now as business owners so that technology doesn't leave us behind is the biggest concern that I amongst my peers and others that we discuss in our circles is how do we stay ahead when educationally we're not prepared.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think that's a really great question. The way I would answer is that technology is something amazing. Is what has allowed us as a civilization to be connected in a global scale, has allowed us to travel to outer space, to be back, to be able to communicate with people that we care for, even though we're not in the same location at the same time. But we need to be aware of it as a tool, which is what it is. I believe that if you have a business model and you're producing value to customers, and that value is strong enough, then it will be very hard to disrupt that business model, regardless of whatever technological innovation might come. That said, there's things that I think it's very important to keep in mind with the current trends of the times. Say, for example, there's a huge spike in cybercrime, which I know our cybersecurity friend would love to discuss with everyone about. And I think that's something that we should all take into account because that could be a very strong pushback to all the technological development that we've had. Once we start experiencing the negative side effects of whatever good that has come out of technology can have in your life, then you start shifting perspective. It's almost like living in a Black Mirror, one of those TV Netflix shows, Black Mirror episodes, in which start noticing that not everything is as good as it sounded. I think the most important thing is to keep an open mind on what's outside, to always talk with experts, collaborate with experts. But then again, as business owners, to really understand your client, to focus on your client and the business value that you're generating, to have technology as a tool that you can use and apply to protect them and to improve whatever you're doing, but only more as an add-on, not as a core thing that you're doing. That's the way I think about it. I don't know.
I generally agree, but I come at it from a slightly different angle. So I won't reiterate anything you said. If you look at it in cycles, okay, so if you trace this all the way back, we had mainframe computing, right? And we now have cloud-based computing, which is differentiated based on speeds of the internet connection. But fundamentally, you're using a core set of processors in one place and then you're just remoting it. So we have thin computing, thick computing, master slave, all of this stuff is just iterations on a theme. Yes, the technology improves, but what is the interesting thing that happens as you're doing it, right? There's centralization things, and then they get to a point where, wait a minute, I'm so bogged down with the cost of a centralized management system. I'm so bogged down by the speed. I now have to start bolting things on, i.e. edge computing, in order to make this fast enough to actually do anything I want, which is the first step of decentralization. Now you start to look at that and say, well, it's still not fast enough for any of these IoT devices. If you have anything that needs to function in real time, so now you have to use IP, but you want to cut out everything else that you possibly can in that data communication path. So now you're ending up thinking about, how do I go using IP, at least the first couple of layers? How do I then go my own way? And I just want to go and process over here and do it my way in some kind of direct peer-to-peer engagement. That solves the security risk, because it's very hard to get attacked on millions or billions of nodes. Right? It's very easy to get attacked when you know AWS dot, right? So those kinds of things tend to drive us in that we've made the prize so easy to find. Right? Go after the cloud provider because that's where all the damn data is. If you want to steal it, go there. So now what we're seeing is this move to get something that's not in the cloud. And maybe IoT has to embrace some of that kind of thinking too. So somewhat long-winded, I don't know if it directly hits the question you asked, but I'd say that if you think about the solution you're trying to do and what the constraints on it are, don't buy into the, if I buy IBM, I'll never get fired routine, and just do it the way that everybody else has. Think about exactly what you're trying to get done and what's technically plugged together to do it.
I have a two-part statement. So firstly, I wanted to acknowledge the agreements aren't going to change until the consumer pushes back. And that's unfortunate, because we just have to constantly be this vigilant, advocate, self-advocate, and it's tiresome. What if we just wanted to live our lives in peace, for example? That being said, I'd like to address my colleague's question, because as a tech innovator in the IoT space, sensors, hardware is hard. That stupid phrase is there for a reason. And so I can tell you that our journey was to use off-the-shelf stuff just to try to get started. But I could tell you that the off-the-shelf stuff really wasn't as off-the-shelf as you would think, right? Everybody said this is Bluetooth and it's blah, 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 and it should connect, except it didn't. When I tried to combine off-the-shelf stuff from various vendors, they each had their own special source, secret sauce on BLE. And this gateway wouldn't talk to the other guys' sensors because they needed to have secret sauce too. And by the time you re-engineer the firmware on the hardware in order for it to do the secret sauce dance, you're into tens of thousands of dollars. You're into months and months of endless going down a rabbit hole because you don't even know if it's going to work, right? And so I'd like to challenge the world of VR and AR, are there ways in which IoT entrepreneurs could potentially demonstrate the value of a system without actually having to build IoT sensors, provided they're more or less pre-vetted by engineering that, okay, it'll work and this is what it'll look like. So that we're not selling something we can't deliver, right? My motto is under promise and over deliver. Now, the last thing I want to do is sell something and then repent. Okay. So how could we use, we've got the technology, help us figure this out, because we can't go broke.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we have this, we solved this, I don't know how many times, I two immediately come to mind. Remember the first phones that came out with browsers on them? They were called WAP browsers. Right? You couldn't go to the internet, right? So that was just like, it was insanity to say that now, but back then it was, well, we don't have the bandwidth to do, we have to do something. No, it was an intent to try and get all the money that was being spent to develop websites over here and get some of it over here. And they wanted two websites, right? So, but there was a way to collapse that. And thankfully, the industry figured out how to do that. For domains, we came up with the protocols that allowed us to do it so that you could bring it together. The reason I bring that up as an example, though, is there was a protocol even in those early days that dealt with a device capability discovery protocol, where it was, what can you do? How many colors can you handle? What bandwidth can you tolerate and not tolerate? So you got this back and forth that went on so that the application could then figure out how to give you the best experience. So there are dynamic ways to do it. It just requires that the industry gets together in a reasonable forum and says, I'm not going to argue about the protocol that we use. This one's extensible. Let's just go with this and we'll live with the problems for the next 10 years and then we'll fix them. But there are ways to do it.
Yeah,
I just want to say that the situation becomes a lot more complicated when you're a non-technical inventor and you're not an engineer and you wouldn't, what you don't know that you don't know.
I totally see what you're saying, but I think you told us the solution to most of the problems from the start, and that's to leverage whatever's out there already. There's a lot of technology that can be used, maybe not specifically in the way we have envisioned it, but at least in a similar fashion, which can prove a business case. And then if there's enough interest and traction and funding, we can start developing furtherly. But I think to leverage whatever is out there. Fortunately, in the tech space, most people are very collaborative, or at least you'll find some that are. So fortunately, I think that there's definitely ways in which we can get that. I also want to thank everyone for coming and for listening to our talk. I hope we provided some insights into IoT, and to Mike as well, because his contribution was really good for the topic.
Thanks, everybody.